Breaking. Nancy Guthrie's last phone call. What investigators found shocking you. When a person disappears under circumstances that demand explanation, law enforcement creates a hierarchy of evidence. Not all evidence carries equal investigative weight. A piece of security footage might be crucial. A DNA profile might be essential. A ransom note might reshape the entire understanding of what occurred. But there is one category of evidence that sits uniquely at the intersection of timing, opportunity, and human behavior. The last documented conversation before everything changed. In the Nancy Guthrie investigation, that conversation became the single most elevated piece of evidence in the entire file. Not the doorbell footage, not the ransom notes that arrived at television stations, not the DNA recovered from inside the residence. When federal investigators and sheriff's deputies reviewed thousands of pieces of evidence collected across the most resource-intensive missing persons investigation in recent Arizona history, one phone call sat at the very top. A conversation that lasted only minutes. A conversation whose contents have never been fully released to the public. A conversation that investigators flagged with a significance that demands serious examination. Before we examine what that phone call might tell us about the final hours before Nancy Guthrie disappeared, if you're following serious investigative analysis like this, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications. This channel goes deeper than headlines. We examine the evidence, we follow the facts, and we don't settle for easy answers in cases that demand better. If you're already part of this community, hit that like button. Your engagement helps this kind of in-depth investigation reach more people who care about cases like Nancy's. Now let's talk about what investigators were listening for in that conversation and what the timeline reveals about its significance. Nancy Long Guthrie had built 50 years of life in Tucson, Arizona. She wasn't a person who drew attention to herself. She was the kind of woman whose absence is felt immediately by everyone around her because her presence had become part of the rhythm of community. She contributed to the University of Arizona. She helped maintain the state's poison information hotline during budget crises that threatened to shut it down in the 1990s. She attended church every single Sunday morning via live stream from her living room, a routine so consistent that when she failed to appear for one service, her friends noticed the absence before police did. She raised 3 children after her husband Charles passed away during a mining trip in Mexico in 1988. She did it alone, without falling apart, without disappearing into grief. She kept going the way mothers do when there is no other option. Her daughter Savannah became one of the most recognized faces on American television. But to Nancy, Savannah was still just her daughter. The family stayed close. Dinners regularly, board games afterward, matching pajamas at Christmas. The small rituals that families build without thinking about how precious they are until they're gone. On Saturday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy ordered an Uber from her home in the Catalina foothills at 5:32 in the evening. The destination was 4 miles away, her daughter Annie's house. A short ride through quiet residential streets she had traveled countless times. Dinner that evening was what every family dinner sounds like. The family sat together and talked about everyday things, life, work, plans for the weeks ahead. Afterward, they played board games, a small tradition that had become part of how this family spent time together. There was no tension, no argument, no moment that anyone in that room would later point to and say something felt wrong. It was just a family evening, the kind that happens in homes across the country every weekend. Annie's husband was Tommaso Cioni. He had been part of this family since 2006. He taught advanced biology and 6th grade science at Basis Oro Valley, 15 years in the classroom, the kind of teacher students remember. Outside of school, he played bass guitar in a local band. He wrote poetry. He studied reptiles and desert wildlife. Christmas photos taken just weeks before Nancy disappeared showed the whole family together. Tommaso standing beside Nancy, holding the family dog, smiling. By every visible measure, a man completely at home inside this family structure. As the evening wound down, somewhere between 9:30 and 9:45, Tommaso offered to drive Nancy home, a few minutes along familiar streets. At 9:48 p.m., the garage door opened. At 9:50 p.m., it closed. At that moment, Tommaso Cioni was the last known person to have seen Nancy Guthrie alive. He drove away from the house. The neighborhood went quiet. The night continued exactly as it had 1,000 times before. Nobody felt anything unusual. Nobody sensed that anything was wrong. It was simply the end of a Saturday evening, the kind that families do not think about again until they have to. But what happened next entered territory that investigators immediately recognized as significant. After Tommaso drove away, a phone call was made. The exact contents of that call have never been released to the public. But federal investigators confirmed it happened. They pulled the record, they analyzed it. And in a case with thousands of tips, hundreds of investigators working simultaneously, and weeks of forensic analysis running across multiple laboratories, investigators elevated that single phone call above every other piece of evidence in the file. Think about what that means operationally. Out of everything collected in this investigation, the doorbell footage showing the masked individual approaching Nancy's front door, the ransom notes that arrived at local television stations and at TMZ with specific details that had never been made public, the DNA evidence recovered from inside the residence, the digital records from phones and security systems, the utility box that had been damaged near the property, the glove found 2 miles from the house, the forensic genealogy work being conducted by leading experts. Investigators placed one phone call between Nancy Guthrie and the last person to see her alive at the very top of their analytical priority. When law enforcement examines a conversation in the final hours before someone disappears, they are listening for specific patterns, whether the person on the other end of the line sounded distressed or unusual in any way, whether they mentioned anyone else being present or any unexpected development, whether the tone of the conversation matched what they would expect based on the circumstances and what either party later said about the evening, whether there was any background sound that did not belong in that moment, whether the conversation contained any detail that seemed inconsistent with the established timeline or with what either person claimed happened during that period. In a case where the window of opportunity is measured in hours, the last documented conversation becomes evidence in itself. Not necessarily evidence of wrongdoing, but forensically valuable evidence about the state of the person in the final moments, before the evidence trail goes dark. A call can confirm that a person was alive and well at a specific point in time, which is itself crucial information. But more than that, it can reveal state of mind. It can indicate whether the person felt safe or unsafe, whether anything unusual had occurred, whether anything in the interaction suggested that the evening had proceeded differently than expected. The timeline that investigators constructed shows a specific window that became the focus of the entire investigation. 9:50 p.m. when the garage door closed. 2:28 a.m. when Nancy's pacemaker stopped transmitting data. 4 hours. 4 hours in a quiet desert neighborhood where nothing was supposed to happen. 4 hours that have since become the most carefully analyzed stretch of time in this entire case. Investigators call it the window, the critical period during which every piece of evidence indicates that something catastrophic occurred. Via Entrada, the road that runs through Nancy's neighborhood, is a road that reporters covering this case have described as like a maze at night. No streetlights, impossible to read the street signs in darkness. A road that rewards prior knowledge and punishes strangers. A road that someone navigating confidently at 2 in the morning has already navigated before in daylight enough times to have its turns and its landmarks memorized. The 4-hour window between 9:50 p.m. and 2:28 a.m. is not simply 4 hours of darkness. It is 4 hours that include the time required to account for every practical element of what the evidence shows happened. After Tommaso drove away at approximately 9:50 p.m., the digital record around Nancy's home went silent. No outgoing calls from her phone, no messages sent, no activity suggesting anything other than a woman who had come home from a family dinner and was going about the quiet business of ending her evening. The house remained quiet through the late-night hours. Then, at 1:47 a.m., Nancy's Google Nest doorbell camera disconnected. On its own, that might mean nothing. Devices lose signal. Connections drop randomly. But investigators do not get to decide something means nothing in a case like this. They flag it. They add it to the timeline. 25 minutes later, at 2:12 a.m., One of the motion detection systems recorded activity outside the property. That alert should have triggered a saved video clip, but Nancy had never subscribed to the paid cloud service that automatically stores footage. The system detected movement and preserved nothing. For investigators hoping to see what was happening outside that house in the middle of the night, the camera had sensed something, but they would never see it. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker stopped sending data to the monitoring application connected to her phone. That device was designed to transmit health information continuously, allowing her doctors to track her heart function remotely. The signal went silent. When deputies finally entered the home, they found Nancy's phone sitting exactly where she had left it, on the counter inside the house. Her wallet beside it, her keys, her daily heart medication, all of it exactly where it belonged. None of the items a person takes when they voluntarily leave home were missing. The only thing missing was Nancy herself. Investigators recovered surveillance footage from Nancy's doorbell camera by accessing Google's cloud backup systems. The footage showed an armed individual approaching the front door. The person wore a black ski mask, gloves, a gun in a front holster, positioning that behavioral analysts noted suggested someone with occupational training, a black 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, the kind sold exclusively at Walmart. The individual was approximately 5 feet 9 to 5 feet 10 inches tall, average build. What struck behavioral analysts most was the confidence. The approach to the camera was direct. No hesitation, no searching for the camera's location. The individual knew exactly where it was mounted. The camera was covered without any moment of uncertainty. A nearby shrub was used to further conceal the lens. That level of familiarity with the property, demonstrated in just 44 seconds of recovered footage, indicated prior knowledge. A neighbor told investigators she had spotted a suspicious man near Nancy's home around January 11th, 3 weeks before the disappearance. He wore a baseball cap pulled low. He was hunched over. He was studying the neighborhood in a way that did not fit someone simply passing through. It was the slow, deliberate attention of someone taking inventory of a location. When investigators requested surveillance footage from January 11th weeks into the investigation, the specificity of that request suggested they had identified something connecting that earlier date to the events of February 1st. On the front porch of Nancy's home, investigators found blood. DNA analysis confirmed it was Nancy's. A forensic analyst examining the blood pattern noted something specific: the absence of disruption in the spatter. No voids where footsteps would appear if someone had walked through the scene. The pattern was consistent with blood falling from a stationary or slowly moving source directly above. The analysis suggested Nancy may have been carried rather than walking. She was likely incapacitated before she was removed from the property. She did not walk out of that house. She was taken out of it. The ransom demands arrived at local Tucson television stations and at TMZ. $6 million in Bitcoin, 2 deadlines set and allowed to pass without consequence. When no payment came, a second message arrived demanding different cryptocurrency. What made the notes credible to investigators was their specificity. The writer referenced Nancy's Apple Watch, a floodlight positioned near her home, the exact clothing she had worn to dinner that evening. Details that had never been released publicly, details that only someone with direct knowledge of the crime could know. That specific knowledge embedded in the ransom notes raises a significant question. Who knew what Nancy was wearing that night? Not in a general sense, but the specific clothing she had on when she sat at the dinner table, when she played board games with her family, when she said goodnight and got into the car for the drive home. That is the kind of detail that only a person present at that dinner could accurately provide. The ransom notes have been presented in this investigation as evidence of an outside perpetrator, and they may be exactly that. But the specific details they contain are among the most analytically interesting elements of the case. A retired FBI analyst noted that the writer used the term USD when referencing money, an abbreviation Americans rarely use in casual writing. This raised the possibility that the author may not be American or was deliberately constructing language designed to obscure their identity. The combination of inside knowledge and unusual phrasing created a profile that investigators found distinct and significant. Yet the communication pattern itself did not follow what professional ransom operations typically look like. In financially motivated kidnapping cases, the perpetrators maintain aggressive, consistent contact. They do not let deadlines pass. They maintain pressure. The silence that followed after 2 deadlines passed suggested either an inexperienced perpetrator who panicked or something else entirely. Former FBI agents analyzing these communications noted that the pattern did not reflect how legitimate ransom operations function. The phone call between Nancy and Tommaso Cioni remains at the center of investigative focus precisely because it sits at the intersection of all these questions. It is the last documented conversation before the cameras went dark, before the neighborhood went blind, before the pacemaker went silent. Whatever was said in that call, whatever it revealed or confirmed or contradicted, investigators found it significant enough to place it at the very top of their evidence file. The investigation has progressed significantly since February. Genetic genealogy work continues. DNA profiles are being analyzed through multiple pathways. Cell tower data is being cross-referenced. The FBI's Tucson command post remains operational with personnel rotated to maintain fresh analytical eyes on the evidence. The science is not finished. The investigation continues, and the phone call, whatever it contained, remains part of the official record that investigators marked as their primary analytical priority. The evidence collected, the timeline documented, the 4-hour window analyzed to the minute, the behavioral analysis of the individual on the porch footage, the DNA being processed, the forensic genealogy pathway being developed, all of it points toward a resolution that the investigation is actively pursuing. The answer is in the laboratory. The answer is in the data. The answer is in the evidence. Someone knows what happened on the night of January 31st into February 1st, 2026. Someone knows exactly where Nancy Guthrie is. If you have information, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or visit tips.fbi.gov. The Pima County Sheriff's tip line is 520-351-4900. The combined reward for information leading to Nancy's safe return exceeds $1.2 million. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. Her family is waiting. The evidence is still being analyzed. The investigation continues. If cases like this matter to you, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. We go deeper than the headlines. We examine the evidence. We follow the facts. Every week, new developments in cases that demand serious attention. Join this community of people who care about getting to the truth. This is the verdict room. The evidence has spoken.